My daughter-in-law stripped me of my financial management rights and humiliated me in front of my family. Your judgment has deteriorated with age. As I reviewed my investment portfolio, I smiled calmly and said, "Good luck managing without my expertise." That's when my millionaire son walked through the door. "I'm grateful you're finally here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The living room fell silent as Victoria's voice sliced through the air like a razor. "Your judgment has deteriorated with age, and we can't trust you with financial decisions anymore." Her words bounced off the mahogany walls of my penthouse, and I felt every pair of eyes in the room focus on me with uncomfortable intensity. 8 family members and close advisors, people I'd mentored in business strategy for years, all watching as my daughter-in-law delivered what felt like a calculated assassination of my professional reputation. I sat there in my leather armchair, my hands resting calmly on the mahogany coffee table, trying to absorb the audacity of what had just occurred. At 62, with decades of successful consulting experience behind me, I thought I'd encountered every form of corporate manipulation. I'd navigated hostile takeovers, rebuilt failing companies from the ground up, and established myself as one of the most respected management consultants on the East Coast. But nothing had prepared me for this personal betrayal. "Grace," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false concern now, "we think it's time you stepped back from managing your own assets. For your own protection, of course." The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, the only sound cutting through the suffocating tension. I could see my longtime financial advisor, Robert, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. My attorney Patricia looked like she wanted to object, but kept glancing nervously at Victoria. These professionals had become trusted allies over the years, and now they were witnessing what felt like my financial funeral. I stood up slowly, my knees steady despite the shock of the ambush disguised as a family financial planning meeting. My hands remained perfectly still, though I expected them to tremble. Instead, I felt an unusual sense of clarity washing over me, like the calm before I dismantled a failing business strategy. "Well," I said, my voice controlled and professional, "I suppose you've made your position clear." I gathered my leather portfolio and Mont Blanc pen, the same ones I'd used in countless boardroom victories. "I'll need to review my options." Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. I could tell she'd expected emotional breakdown, maybe desperate pleading. Certainly some kind of vulnerable display that would justify her power grab to the room full of witnesses. Instead, I walked toward the panoramic windows with my shoulders back and my dignity intact. "Grace," called out my business partner, David, his voice thick with indignation. "This is unconscionable. You built half the companies in this city." I paused by the floor-to-ceiling windows and turned back to look at him, then at the rest of the room. "Thank you, David. Your loyalty means everything to me." My eyes found Victoria's, and for just a moment I saw something flicker across her perfectly composed face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the first hint of fear. The walk to my home office felt like crossing a battlefield. 15 years I'd been building my consulting empire. I'd started as a junior analyst fresh out of night school, worked my way up through mid-level management positions, then launched my own firm specializing in corporate turnarounds. I'd seen this penthouse grow from a modest downtown apartment to a showcase of everything I'd accomplished. And now, in the span of 30 minutes, Victoria was attempting to strip it all away. My office door opened silently, the kind of quality hardware that never needed maintenance. The space that had been my command center looked exactly the same, yet somehow everything felt different, as if Victoria's words had fundamentally altered the atmosphere of success I'd cultivated. I pulled out my leather document case, originally purchased for my first major consulting contract. How ironic that it would now hold evidence of my own family's betrayal. Financial statements went in first my real estate portfolio documentation, my investment account summaries, copies of contracts from my most recent consulting engagements where I'd saved companies millions. As I organized my documents, I found myself analyzing Victoria. Stunning, ambitious Victoria with her perfectly highlighted hair and her MBA from Wharton. She'd entered our family's orbit 2 years ago like a Category 5 hurricane, and Ethan had been completely mesmerized. I'd tried to be welcoming, tried to appreciate what my son saw in her, but there had always been something fundamentally wrong with her approach to relationships, something I recognized from my years dealing with corporate predators. The soft knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. "Mrs. Chen?" It was Hannah, my research assistant. Her eyes were wide with concern, and she clutched a stack of financial reports in her hand. Yes, dear. I just wanted to say what happened downstairs was completely inappropriate. Everyone in the building knows your mental acuity is sharper than people half your age. I smiled at her, genuinely moved by her support. Thank you, Hannah. But sometimes family dynamics require delicate handling. Even as I said the words, I was already formulating a strategy. This wasn't about mental capacity or age-related decline. This was about something far more calculated. After Hannah left, I continued organizing my evidence in systematic silence. My coffee cup from this morning's review of the Asian markets. The small jade plant that had thrived under my care for 8 years. The Industry Excellence Award from the National Association of Management Consultants, recognizing my innovative turnaround methodologies. By 4 o'clock, my office was organized for battle. The walls displayed my certifications and photographs from successful consulting engagements. I took one final look around, memorizing the view from my windows that overlooked the financial district where I'd orchestrated so many corporate recoveries. I carried my document case through the main hallway, feeling the weight of my own determination. The household staff watched with respectful concern. Some were visibly upset, others pretended to be busy with their duties. But I could see them monitoring my movements with protective concern. Victoria was waiting by the private elevator, her arms crossed and a smug expression playing at the corners of her mouth. I trust you understand the necessity of today's decision, she asked, though her tone suggested she was already savoring her victory. I shifted the document case in my hands and looked at her directly, really studied her. The designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, the diamond tennis bracelet that caught the afternoon light perfectly, the wedding ring that matched the one my son wore, the symbol that had brought him such joy when she accepted his proposal. I understand more than you realize, I replied with professional calm. Then, surprising myself as much as her, I smiled. Not a bitter smile or a defeated one, but a genuine, almost strategic smile. Good luck managing my portfolio, Victoria. You're going to need every bit of luck you can find. Something shifted in her expression just for a moment. The arrogance wavered, and I saw a flash of something that might have been genuine panic. But then the elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside without breaking eye contact. As the doors closed and I descended to the parking garage, I found myself thinking about that flash of panic in Victoria's eyes. What did she know that she thought I didn't? Or perhaps the more relevant question was, what did I know that she was desperately hoping I hadn't noticed? The elevator stopped with a soft chime and I walked toward my car. That strange sense of professional clarity still surrounded me like armor. I had the strongest intuition that this wasn't over. Not even close. Sitting in my car in the underground garage, I found myself remembering that autumn evening 2 years ago when Ethan first brought Victoria home for dinner. I should have trusted my business instincts then. But love makes even the most analytical minds vulnerable, and Ethan had been so completely captivated. Grace, I want you to meet someone extraordinary, he'd said on the phone that Thursday afternoon. His voice had that breathless quality I hadn't heard since he was a college student with his first serious relationship. Can you prepare that amazing seafood risotto this Sunday? I'd been thrilled. At 35, Ethan had had his share of relationships, but none that merited meeting his family. I'd spent the entire weekend planning the perfect dinner, reviewing wine selections and rehearsing casual conversation topics. When Sunday arrived, I heard Ethan's key in the penthouse lock just as I was adding the final garnish to the risotto. "Grace, we're here," he called out, and there was something in his voice, a nervous excitement that made my consultant instincts sharpen with curiosity. "Coming!" I removed my apron and walked to the living room where Ethan stood with his arm around the most striking woman I'd ever encountered in person. She was tall and elegant, with lustrous blonde hair that looked professionally maintained. Her dress was understated but expensive, the kind that signals serious money without ostentation. "Grace, this is Victoria Sterling," Ethan said, his eyes never leaving her face. "Victoria, this is my mother, Grace." Victoria stepped forward with a smile that belonged in corporate boardrooms. "Mrs. Chen, I've heard incredible things about your consulting work. Ethan talks about your business achievements constantly." Her handshake was firm, confident, but there was something in her eyes that didn't align with the warmth of her smile. Something evaluative. "Please call me Grace," I said, immediately analyzing her approach for inconsistencies. "And I've heard nothing about you," which means my son has been uncharacteristically secretive. Ethan laughed, but it sounded rehearsed. I wanted it to be a surprise. Victoria and I met at that merger and acquisition conference in Boston last month. During dinner, Victoria was the perfect guest. She praised the food with specific culinary knowledge, asked insightful questions about the art collection on the walls, and listened with apparent fascination as I shared stories about Ethan's academic achievements. She even offered to help with cleanup, though I noticed she was careful to protect her manicured nails. "Your home is so sophisticated," she said as we worked together in the kitchen. It must have been inspiring growing up here, Ethan, but something about the way she said it, with just a hint of assessment in the word sophisticated, made my business radar activate. When she thought I wasn't observing, I caught her cataloguing the expensive furnishings with the kind of expressions someone might wear when appraising valuable assets. After they left that evening, I called my sister Carol. "There's something calculated about her," I confessed, staring at the lipstick mark Victoria had left on my crystal wine glass. "Grace, you analyze everyone like a potential business threat," Carol reminded me. "Remember Jennifer? You were convinced she was positioning herself for financial advantage. And she turned out to be one of the most genuine people I've ever met." Carol was partially right. I did tend to view relationships through a strategic lens when it came to Ethan. He was my only child, and after his father died when he was 17, we'd developed an unusually close professional and personal bond. Perhaps too close. Over the following months, I watched Victoria systematically integrate herself into Ethan's life. She had an MBA from Wharton, she told us, and worked in private equity consulting. She was between positions, she explained with practiced vulnerability, having left her previous firm due to ethical concerns about their client practices. Ethan was completely enchanted. He started dressing differently, trading his comfortable business casual attire for expensive suits that Victoria helped him select. His apartment, which had always been functional but comfortable, suddenly looked like something from Architectural Digest. "She has incredible taste," he raved to me during one of our weekly business lunches. "You should see what she's done with my place. It's like stepping into a completely elevated lifestyle." That phrase resonated with warning bells, elevated lifestyle. As if his previous life, the one that included his mother and longtime friends and established routines, wasn't sophisticated enough anymore. The changes in Ethan became more pronounced as the months passed. He started missing our weekly business discussions, usually with apologies and explanations about important client dinners or weekend retreats that Victoria had arranged. When we did see each other, Victoria was usually present, redirecting conversations toward topics that excluded me or subtly correcting his recollections about our family. "Oh, Ethan, you're being modest," she'd say with a laugh when he talked about his business school achievements. "You don't need to minimize your success for anyone," the implication being that he was minimizing it for me, his own mother. The engagement announcement came exactly 15 months after that first dinner. They planned an intimate ceremony, immediate family only, at an exclusive resort in Martha's Vineyard. "Nothing ostentatious," Ethan assured me, though the venue probably cost more than most people's annual income. I tried to be supportive, tried to focus on Ethan's happiness, but Victoria made it increasingly challenging. During the wedding planning, she would solicit my opinion on flowers or music, then explain why my suggestions weren't suitable. "Grace, that's lovely, but we're aiming for a more contemporary aesthetic," became her standard response. The night before the wedding, as I sat alone in my hotel suite, I called Carol again. "I feel like I'm losing him to someone who doesn't value what we've built together," I admitted, allowing tears to come after months of maintaining professional composure. "Grace, this is natural," Carol said gently. "When children marry, the family dynamic evolves. It doesn't mean Ethan values you less, but it felt like less. It felt like Victoria was systematically erasing me from my son's life, one strategic move at a time. And the most frustrating part was that she was executing it so skillfully, so subtly, that objecting would make me appear to be a possessive mother who couldn't accept change. The morning after the wedding, as Ethan and Victoria prepared to leave for their honeymoon in the Mediterranean, Ethan embraced me goodbye. "Thanks for everything, Grace," he whispered in my ear. "I'm truly happy." I held him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something new. Victoria's expensive perfume that seemed to permeate everything now. "That's all I want," I whispered back. "Your happiness." But as I watched them drive away, Victoria's perfectly manicured hand resting proprietarily on Ethan's arm. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something more significant than a honeymoon departure. It felt like a strategic withdrawal. Now, sitting in this parking garage 2 years later with a document case full of evidence in my passenger seat, I realized my business instincts had been accurate all along. Victoria hadn't just wanted Ethan's love. She'd wanted his assets, and stripping me of financial control was just the latest maneuver in her systematic acquisition. What I couldn't understand was why Ethan was permitting it to happen. The son I'd raised was analytically sharp and protective, especially regarding family. The Ethan I knew would never allow someone to treat his mother this way unless he was unaware. Unless Victoria was even more strategically sophisticated than I'd initially assessed. I started my car and exited the parking garage, glancing once more at the building where I'd spent most of my professional life. Something was fundamentally wrong here. Something beyond a simple case of an ambitious daughter-in-law. As I drove toward my next destination, one thought kept echoing in my mind. If Victoria had misrepresented this situation, what else had she misrepresented? I was halfway to my attorney's office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Ethan's number, and for a moment my heart surged with hope. Maybe he'd heard about what happened. Maybe he was calling to apologize to resolve this crisis his wife had created. "Hello, sweetheart," I answered, trying to keep the tension out of my voice. "Grace, I just landed at Logan Airport. I'm driving straight to the penthouse. Is everything all right? Victoria's been sending me cryptic messages all day." My breath caught. Ethan had been in London for a week-long international consulting conference. He didn't know. Victoria had orchestrated my humiliation while my own son was 4,000 miles away. "I'm fine, dear. Just had an enlightening day with family." I pulled into the law firm's parking structure, my hands steady on the steering wheel. "You should probably go directly home, though. I'm sure Victoria missed you." There was a pause and I could hear airport noise in the background. "Grace, you sound strange. What's happening?" "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow. Drive safely." I hung up before he could ask more questions. Let Victoria explain herself. Let her try to construct whatever narrative she'd prepared to justify attacking his mother while he was away. Inside my attorney's office, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the conference table, staring at the document case I'd brought with me. The silence felt oppressive after years of constant phone calls and urgent business decisions. For the first time in decades, I had absolutely no meetings scheduled. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Mrs. Chen, after you left, Victoria called an emergency family meeting. She said you'd been making questionable investment decisions and that's why intervention was necessary. Everyone knows it's not true, but she made us all sign confidentiality agreements. I'm so sorry." The teacup slipped from my hands, tea spilling across the polished conference table. Questionable investment decisions. Victoria was accusing me of financial incompetence regarding the portfolio I'd built through decades of strategic planning. The audacity was breathtaking, but the implications were terrifying. If she was spreading that narrative, she was covering up something much more significant than my financial management. I opened my laptop and accessed my investment accounts, expecting to find my access revoked. Surprisingly, I was still able to log into the systems. Either Victoria was more careless than I'd thought, or she'd been in such a rush to neutralize me that she'd forgotten about my administrative access. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Over the past 8 months, there had been a series of transfers from my main investment account to offshore accounts I didn't recognize. Small amounts initially, then increasingly substantial sums. The most recent transfer, executed just this morning, was for $75,000. But it wasn't the money that made my hand shake as I scrolled through the records. It was the authorization signatures. Every single transfer had been approved by 2 people, Victoria Sterling Chen and someone listed as E. Chen's secondary authorization. Ethan's signature, or what appeared to be Ethan's signature. I printed out the financial records, my laser printer humming in the quiet office. 28 unauthorized transfers totaling over $300,000, all bearing my son's apparent approval. Either Ethan was involved in whatever Victoria was orchestrating, or she was forging his signature. The sound of a car door slamming outside made me look up. Through the conference room window, I could see Ethan's Tesla parked in the visitor space, and my son striding toward the building entrance with an intensity I hadn't seen since he was a graduate student facing final exams. He didn't wait for the receptionist. His keycard accessed the private elevator. and he appeared in the conference room doorway like a man seeking answers. Grace, what happened today? His tie was loosened, his usually immaculate hair dishevelled from running his hands through it. Victoria said you'd stepped back voluntarily, but half our business associates are calling and emailing me saying you were forced out and something about concerns over your judgment. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit down, Ethan. We need to have a serious conversation. I don't want to sit down. I want to know why my wife is telling me one version and my colleagues are telling me another. He remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. Start from the beginning. So I did. I told him about the meeting, about Victoria's calculated dismissal, about the accusation of poor judgment that she'd apparently shared with our associates after I left. I watched his face cycle through disbelief, anger, and something that looked almost like relief. That's impossible, he said when I finished. Victoria wouldn't do that. She knows how much you mean to me, how much you've accomplished in business. I slid the printed financial records across the table. Then explain these. Ethan picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the numbers. I watched his expression change as he absorbed the transfers. The amounts, the dates. When he reached the signature pages, his face went completely pale. This isn't my signature, he said quietly. I never authorized any of these transfers. I didn't think you had. He looked up at me, and I saw my little boy again, confused and hurt and looking to his mother for guidance. But if I didn't sign these and you didn't authorize these transfers, then your wife has been stealing from my accounts and forging your signature to cover it up. The silence stretched between us. I could see him struggling, trying to reconcile the woman he'd married with the evidence in front of him. It's one thing to suspect your spouse of being manipulative or ambitious. It's another thing entirely to discover they're a criminal. There has to be an explanation, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe she was trying to protect your assets somehow. Maybe there's something I don't understand about the financial management. I reached across the table and took his hand. Sweetheart, I know this is painful, but you need to look at the pattern here. She stripped me of control while you were away, accused me of the very incompetence she's been demonstrating, and made our associates sign confidentiality agreements to keep them quiet. This isn't protection. This is a systematic takeover. Ethan pulled his hand away and started pacing the conference room. If this is true, if she's really been stealing from you, then she's not just betraying your trust. She's been lying to me every single day for months. I'm afraid it might be longer than that. He stopped pacing and looked at me sharply. What do you mean? I hesitated. I'd been carrying suspicions about Victoria for 2 years, but saying them out loud would cross a line I couldn't uncross. Once I voiced my doubts about the foundation of his marriage, there would be no taking it back. Grace, what do you mean? I think she's been lying to you since the day you met her. Ethan sank into the chair across from me, his face in his hands. I need proof. Before I can do anything, before I can confront her, I need absolute proof. I understood. As much as it hurt to see him defend someone who was destroying both of us, I understood. He'd built his life around this woman, planned his future with her. You don't just walk away from that based on financial records and a mother's intuition. What kind of proof? I asked. He looked up and I saw a hardness in his eyes that reminded me of his father. The kind that leaves no room for doubt. The kind that shows me exactly who I married. As he sat there lost in thought, I realized something had shifted. The blind trust he'd shown Victoria for 2 years was cracking. He was starting to see what I'd seen all along. But I also knew that discovering the truth about someone you love is a dangerous thing. It changes you in ways you can't predict. As I looked at my son's face, pale and drawn with the weight of betrayal, I wondered if protecting him from this truth might have been kinder than exposing him to it. Too late for that now. The truth was out, spreading like cracks in ice. The only question was how much more damage it would do before everything finally shattered. I'm going home, Ethan said finally. I need to examine our personal accounts, see if there are other irregularities I've missed. And I need to figure out how to handle this without destroying everything we've built. I walked him to the elevator, my heart breaking for the pain I could see him trying to hide. Ethan, whatever you find, whatever you decide to do, I'm here. I've always been here. He embraced me tightly, and for a moment he was my little boy again, seeking comfort from the person who'd never failed him. I know, Grace. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. As I watched him drive away, I felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow. I'd been right about Victoria all along, but being right had cost my son his happiness, and his trust in the woman he'd planned to spend his life with. The office felt even quieter after he left, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of ending, but the silence before a storm. Tomorrow, Ethan would start investigating deeper into his wife's deceptions. And I had a feeling that what he found would make today's revelations look like a gentle introduction to the truth. The call came at 6 in the morning. I was already awake, had been since 4, lying in bed replaying yesterday's events over and over. When I saw Ethan's name on my phone, my stomach clenched with dread. "Grace, I need you to come over now." His voice was hollow, distant. "Don't call first, just come. And Grace, bring your master keys to the investment accounts. I need to access Victoria's private files." I threw on clothes and drove through the empty streets to Ethan's house, my mind racing with possibilities. What had he found? How much worse could this get? The house was dark except for a single light in Ethan's study. I let myself in with the spare key he'd given me years ago, back when things were normal, back when I was welcome in my son's home. I found him sitting at his desk, surrounded by papers and laptops, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Ethan?" I approached carefully, as if he were a wounded animal that might bolt. He held up a manila folder without looking at me. "Her real name isn't Victoria Sterling. It's Victoria Hartwell, and she was never between positions when we met. She was terminated from her previous firm for financial fraud." The words hit me like physical blows. "How did you find out?" "I hired a private investigator 8 months ago." He finally looked up at me, and the pain in his eyes was unbearable. I started having doubts about small things, stories that didn't align, phone calls she'd take in another room, the way she'd deflect whenever I asked about her family or her background. "8 months ago, Ethan. Why didn't you tell me?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I was hoping I was wrong. Because I was hoping my mother's business instincts had just made me paranoid." He gestured to the papers scattered across his desk. "Turns out your business instincts were the only honest thing in my marriage." I sat down in the chair across from him. The same chair where I'd watched him study for business school exams, where we'd planned his consulting career, where he'd nervously rehearsed his proposal speech before asking Victoria to marry him. "There's more," he said quietly. The investigator found records of 2 previous marriages, both to wealthy businessmen. Both ended in divorces where she walked away with substantial settlements. My hands trembled as I reached for the folder. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize yet. You haven't heard the worst part." He pulled out another document, this one with a medical logo at the top. "Remember when she told me she was pregnant 8 months into our relationship? When she had the miscarriage that made me propose to support her through the grief?" I nodded, remembering how devastated Ethan had been, how guilty he'd felt for not being there when she lost the baby. "There was no pregnancy, no miscarriage. She faked the entire thing." His voice cracked. "The investigator found medical records. She's been on birth control the entire time we've been together. The pregnancy test she showed me, the ultrasound photos, the doctor's appointments, all fabricated." The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across the floor. "Oh, Ethan. She used a fake pregnancy to manipulate me into proposing. Then she used a fake miscarriage to manipulate me into an immediate wedding so I wouldn't leave her during her supposed time of need." He air-quoted the words, his face twisting with disgust. Every single foundational moment of our relationship was a calculated deception. I knelt down to gather the scattered papers, needing something to do with my hands while my mind processed this information. Among the documents, I found photographs, surveillance shots of Victoria meeting with a man I didn't recognize, receipts from expensive restaurants charged to company credit cards, bank statements showing the money trail from our accounts to personal accounts in names I'd never heard. "Who is this?" I held up one of the surveillance photos. "Connor Hayes, her real partner. They've been together the entire time." Ethan's voice was getting steadier now, as if talking about it was helping him process the magnitude of the betrayal. "The investigator followed them for weeks. They lived together in a condo downtown that she bought with money stolen from your accounts. Everything she told me about working late, about business trips, about visiting her sick mother, she was with him." I stared at the photo of Victoria laughing with this stranger, her hand on his arm in a gesture of intimacy that should have been reserved for her husband. She looked genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen her look with Ethan. "How long have you known all this?" "The final report came yesterday morning while I was still in London. That's why I was rushing back. Why I went straight to the penthouse instead of home. I was going to confront her." demand an explanation. He rubbed his face with both hands. Instead, I found out she'd stripped you of control and was spreading lies about your judgment. That's when I knew she was accelerating whatever endgame she had planned. Endgame? Ethan pulled out his laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a divorce petition, already filled out and waiting to be filed. She's been preparing to divorce me for months. According to this, she's claiming I've been financially controlling, that I forced her to work in the family business against her will, that I isolated her from her family and friends. His laugh was bitter. The only family and friends she has are fabrications. But apparently that doesn't matter in divorce court. But with all this evidence of her fraud, she's been very careful. Most of the stolen money is in accounts with names similar to legitimate business expenses. The forged signatures are sophisticated enough that it would take a handwriting expert to prove they're fake. And she's been building her case against me for months, creating documentation of my supposed financial abuse, my supposed control over her. I felt sick. She's been planning this from the beginning. Longer than that. The investigator thinks she's done this before, probably with both previous husbands. Find a successful man, marry him quickly, gain access to his finances, steal what she can while building a case for divorce, then disappear with everything she can get her hands on. The room fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, the one that had belonged to Ethan's father. I thought about all the family dinners where Victoria had sat at our table, all the holidays where she'd opened gifts and pretended to be grateful, all the times I'd bitten my tongue when I wanted to voice my suspicions. "There's something else," Ethan said quietly. "Something I need to show you at the bank. Something I found in her computer that explains why she was so desperate to strip your control yesterday." "What do you mean?" "She knows that you've been suspicious of her from the beginning. She's been monitoring your account access, tracking what investments you review, what financial records you examine. She moved against you because she was afraid you were getting too close to discovering what she's been doing." The irony was bitter. Victoria had been so focused on watching me that she hadn't noticed Ethan was watching her. "So what do we do now?" I asked. Ethan closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Now we go to the bank and gather evidence. Then we call the police and file charges for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Then I file for divorce and try to salvage whatever's left of our assets. And personally, how are you handling all this?" For the first time since I'd arrived, his composure cracked. "I don't know, Grace. I thought I knew this person. I thought I loved her. How do you process finding out that everything you believed about your life was a lie?" I reached across the desk and took his hand. "One day at a time. One truth at a time. And you remember that not everything was a lie. Your family is real. The people who truly love you are real. The business we built together is real." He squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry I let her come between us. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. You don't need to apologize for loving someone, even if they didn't deserve it. I need to apologize for questioning your business judgment." I smiled, trying to lighten the moment just slightly. He managed a small smile in return. "Your judgment has always been impeccable, especially about people who don't deserve us." As we prepared to leave for the bank to gather the evidence that would bring down the woman who had nearly destroyed our family and our finances, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was painful, devastating even, but it was still the truth. And truth, no matter how ugly, was always better than living a lie. The real question now was what else we might find when we dug deeper into Victoria's deceptions. If she'd been this thorough in planning her exit strategy, what other surprises had she left for us to discover? Looking at my son's determined expression as he gathered up the evidence, I realized that whatever we found, we'd face it together the way we should have been facing things all along, before a master manipulator convinced him that his mother was the threat. Now the real threat was finally unmasked, and she had no idea what was coming for her. We arrived at the private banking center at 7:30, an hour before regular hours. Ethan's hands shook slightly as he used his access card, and I realized this was harder for him than he was letting on. Whatever we found in Victoria's private accounts would be the final confirmation of his marriage's complete foundation of lies. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked as we walked through the quiet marble lobby. "I have to. If I'm going to rebuild my life, if I'm going to restore our financial security, I need to know everything." He stopped outside the private client office. "Besides, she'll be here in an hour for her regular appointment. If we're going to do this, it has to be now." I accessed the account systems with my administrative credentials. The same credentials she'd probably forgotten I still had when she orchestrated my removal from control. The interface was immaculate as always. Victoria's accounts were organized with military precision. Every transaction categorized and sorted. Ethan went straight to the transfer records while I searched the account statements. In the bottom folder, hidden beneath a stack of legitimate investment documents, I found a file labeled Personal Security. Inside were dozens of printed emails between Victoria and Connor Hayes, discussing their plans with a casualness that made my stomach turn. "Ethan, you need to see this." He looked up from the computer screen, his face already grim. "Bad news first or worse news first?" I handed him the folder. "Let's start with bad and work our way down." He scanned the emails, his expression growing darker with each page. "She's been planning to frame me for the financial mismanagement. Look at this one from last week." He pointed to a particular email. "E is getting suspicious about the missing funds. Time to accelerate timeline. Make sure evidence points to him, not us." "Evidence points to him?" Ethan turned the computer screen toward me. "She's been using my login credentials to make the transfers. She must have watched me enter my password and memorized it. Every single transaction shows my username as the authorization, with timestamps that correspond to times when I was supposedly at the office." I felt cold dread settling in my stomach. "But you have alibis for those times, right? Meeting schedules, security footage." That's the genius of it. She picked times when I was legitimately in the building, just not at my computer. Times when I was in client meetings or in the research library or at lunch. If someone investigated, it would look like I stepped away from my computer and left myself logged in. We continued searching, finding more evidence of Victoria's systematic destruction of everything Ethan had worked for. She'd been documenting his financially controlling behavior for months, creating a paper trail of fabricated incidents and twisted interpretations of normal business decisions. She'd photographed the modest jewelry he'd bought her, claiming in written statements that he'd forced her to wear ostentatious displays of his wealth to make her feel owned. Every kindness he'd shown her, every romantic gesture, every attempt to include her in financial decisions had been weaponized against him. "How did I not see this?" Ethan asked, staring at a particularly vicious email where Victoria described him as controlling and manipulative for wanting to know why she was working late so often. "Because you're not a sociopath," I said simply. "Normal people don't think this way. Normal people don't plan the destruction of someone they claim to love." At 8:15, we heard the distinctive click of high heels in the marble hallway. Victoria was early, probably eager to continue her victory lap from yesterday. Ethan and I exchanged glances. "What do you want to do?" I whispered. "Confront her with everything. Let her try to lie her way out of this." The footsteps stopped outside the office door. We heard Victoria's key in the lock. Then her sharp intake of breath when she realized the lights were already on. "Ethan!" Her voice was carefully modulated, surprised but not alarmed. "What are you doing here so early? And Grace? I thought we discussed that your access to these accounts was revoked." She stood in the doorway, perfect as always in an expensive charcoal suit. Her blonde hair swept back in a flawless chignon. But for the first time, I could see past the facade to the predator underneath. "We need to talk," Ethan said, gesturing to the chair across from the desk. "Please sit down." Victoria's eyes flickered between us, and I saw a flash of calculation before she composed herself. "Of course, darling. Though I'm not sure why your mother needs to be present for a private conversation between spouses. Because this conversation involves her. It involves a lot of things you've done that involve her." Victoria sat down gracefully, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap. "I'm afraid I don't understand." Ethan spread the printed emails across the desk like playing cards. "Let's start with these. Your correspondence with Connor Hayes." For just a moment, Victoria's mask slipped. I saw panic flicker across her features before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really? Because there are quite a few emails here discussing our marriage, our finances and your plans to extract maximum value from both." Ethan's voice was deadly calm. "Would you like me to read some of the more interesting passages aloud?" Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ethan, if you're accusing me of having an affair based on some fabricated documents, I'm deeply hurt. After everything we've shared together." "Fabricated?" I couldn't help myself. "Are you seriously going to sit there and lie when we have photographs of you with him?" Ethan pulled out his phone and scrolled to the surveillance photos. He turned the screen toward Victoria, showing her a particularly damning image of her kissing Connor outside their downtown condo. Taken last Tuesday, Ethan said. The day you told me you were visiting your sick mother in Hartford. Victoria stared at the photo, and I watched her mental calculations happen in real time. She was deciding whether to continue lying or switch to a different strategy. All right, she said finally, her voice losing its syrupy sweetness. So I've been seeing someone else. That doesn't make me a criminal. No, but embezzling $300,000 from our accounts does. Ethan opened his laptop and turned it toward her. Care to explain these transfers, the ones with my forged signature? Now Victoria went completely still. This was the evidence that could put her in prison, and we all knew it. Those aren't forged, she said carefully. You authorized those transfers. You just don't remember because you were so stressed about the business. Ethan laughed, but it was a harsh sound. I was stressed about the business because money kept disappearing from our accounts. Money that you were stealing. I was protecting our investments, moving funds to safer accounts during the market volatility last quarter. Safer accounts that happened to be in your boyfriend's name? Victoria's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the complexity of financial management, Ethan. You've always been too trusting, too naive about money. And you've always been too greedy and too careless about covering your tracks. I watched this exchange with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction, because Victoria's careful facade was finally crumbling. Sadness, because I could see the pain in Ethan's eyes as the last of his illusions about his wife died. Here's what's going to happen, Ethan continued. You're going to return every penny you've stolen. You're going to sign a confession detailing your fraud. And you're going to leave quietly without making a scene or trying to destroy what's left of our assets. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. And if I refuse? Then I call the police right now, and you get arrested for embezzlement, fraud and identity theft. Your choice. For a long moment, nobody moved. Victoria stood behind the desk like a cornered animal, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. I could almost see her weighing her options, calculating whether she could still salvage something from this disaster. Finally, she smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that made my skin crawl. You know what, Ethan? You deserve everything that's coming to you. You and your pathetic, controlling mother. She turned her gaze to me, and the hatred in her eyes was startling. You never accepted me. You never gave me a chance. I gave you 2 years of chances, I replied evenly. You used every single one of them to hurt my son. Your precious son is weak. He's always been weak. He needed someone strong to make the hard decisions, to build something real out of this pathetic family legacy. By stealing from us? By doing what needed to be done. She grabbed her purse from the desk. You want your money back? Sue me. You want to press charges? Go ahead, but you'll never prove anything. And by the time you're done paying lawyers, there won't be any assets left to protect. She headed toward the door, then paused and looked back at Ethan. Oh, and darling, you might want to get tested. Connor and I haven't been exactly exclusive, if you know what I mean. With that final cruelty, she walked out, her heels clicking arrogantly down the marble hallway. Ethan sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Then very quietly he said, I think I'm going to be sick. I moved around the desk and put my arms around my son, holding him while he shook with the aftermath of 2 years of lies finally being exposed. Outside, we heard Victoria's car start and speed away. It's over, I whispered. She's gone and she can't hurt us anymore. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't quite true. Victoria might be gone, but the damage she'd done would take time to repair. The question now was whether we'd be able to salvage our assets, and Ethan's faith in love before she found a way to strike back at us, because I was certain she would try. Women like Victoria didn't just disappear quietly into the night. They always had one last card to play. 6 months later, I sat in my restored home office, which had been returned to exactly the way I'd left it, right down to the chipped coffee cup and the small jade plant that had somehow survived Victoria's brief reign of terror. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the business proposals spread across my desk proposals for my new independent consulting firm that showed not just surviving, but thriving. It hadn't been easy. The weeks immediately following Victoria's departure had been a whirlwind of police reports, insurance claims, and establishing my new consulting practice. True to her word, she'd tried to make our lives as difficult as possible, filing a counter-lawsuit alleging financial abuse and wrongful termination. But her case had fallen apart when the Federal Financial Crimes Unit got involved. The federal investigation had revealed that Victoria, whose real name was indeed Victoria Hartwell, had been running variations of the same con for nearly a decade. There were victims in 4 other states, all successful businessmen who'd been systematically robbed by the woman they'd trusted with their hearts and their bank accounts. Ethan knocked on my office door frame, a habit he'd developed since we'd started working together again. "Morning, Grace. Coffee?" I looked up at my son, noting how much healthier he looked than he had 6 months ago. The hollow, haunted expression was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. He set a steaming mug on my desk and settled into the chair across from me. The same chair where he'd sat as a child while I worked late, doing his homework or just keeping me company. "The Morrison Group contract came through," he said, unable to hide his smile. "They want us to handle their entire acquisition strategy for the next 2 years." "That's wonderful news." And it was. The Morrison Group contract would put us solidly in the black for the year, erasing the last of the financial damage Victoria had caused. "There's something else," Ethan said, his tone becoming more serious. "I got a call from Detective Susan Park this morning. Victoria's trial date has been set." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Even though she was locked up, even though she couldn't hurt us anymore, the thought of seeing her again made me uneasy. "Will you testify?" "If they need me to." But Detective Park thinks they have enough evidence without putting us through that ordeal. She's facing federal charges in 5 states now. The prosecutor thinks she'll take a plea deal. I nodded, trying to push away the memories of those dark weeks when we thought we might lose everything. Good. The sooner this is all behind us, the better. Ethan studied my face with the perceptive eyes he'd inherited from his father. "You're still angry." "Not angry. Disappointed. Maybe disappointed that someone could be so calculated, so willing to destroy people who cared about her." "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," Ethan said slowly. "About how she was able to fool me so completely." This was a conversation we'd been dancing around for months. Ethan blamed himself for not seeing through Victoria's deception, for allowing her to come between us, for nearly losing his family and his business to a woman who'd never loved him at all. "You loved her," I said gently. "Or you loved who you thought she was. That's not a character flaw, sweetheart. That's what makes you human. But you saw through her from the beginning." "Why couldn't I?" I set down my coffee and leaned back in my chair, considering how to answer. "Because I was looking at her as a threat to my son. You were looking at her as someone you wanted to build a life with. We were both right in our own ways. I should have listened to you. Maybe. But then you would have always wondered if you'd made the right choice. Sometimes we have to learn things the hard way." Ethan was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the city skyline where this whole nightmare had begun 6 months ago. "I started seeing someone," he said suddenly. My heart did a little leap. "Oh? Her name is Lisa. She's a teacher at the elementary school near my apartment. We met at the coffee shop on Beacon Street." He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him when talking about a woman since before Victoria. "She's nothing like what I thought I wanted before. Tell me about her." "She's quiet, thoughtful. She makes me laugh, but not in that desperate way where you're trying to impress someone. It's just natural." He paused. "She knows about Victoria, about everything that happened. I told her early on because I didn't want any secrets between us. And she said that the fact that I could still trust enough to tell her meant I was going to be okay." He looked at me directly. "I'd like you to meet her, if you're comfortable with that." The question hung in the air between us. We both knew this was about more than introducing me to his new girlfriend. This was about trust, about whether he'd learned from his mistakes, about whether our relationship was strong enough to survive another woman in his life. "I'd love to meet her," I said, and meant it. "Really?" "Really. But Ethan, I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens with Lisa or with anyone else you might meet, you won't let them convince you that your family is the enemy. What we have, what we've rebuilt together, it's worth protecting." He reached across the desk and took my hand. "I promise, Grace. Never again." Later that afternoon, as I was preparing to leave for the day, Hannah knocked on my door. "Mrs. Chen, there's someone here to see you." She says she's from the Financial Crimes Division. My blood ran cold. Had something happened with Victoria's case? Had she somehow managed to cause more trouble from prison? The woman who walked into my office was young, probably in her early 30s with short brown hair and an all-business demeanor. She flashed her badge and introduced herself as Detective Susan Park. "No relation to Victoria," she assured me with a wry smile. "I wanted to speak with you personally about the Hartwell case." she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Your testimony and the evidence you provided were instrumental in building our case against her. I'm glad we could help. Is there a problem with the prosecution? On the contrary. Thanks to your cooperation, we've been able to connect Hartwell to crimes in 7 states now, not just 5. The pattern of behavior you helped us establish has been crucial in getting other victims to come forward. Detective Park pulled out a file folder. I wanted you to know that the total amount of money she stole from various victims over the past 10 years is close to $3 million. Your case, as devastating as it was personally, helped us stop her before she could destroy more lives. $3 million. I tried to imagine how many families had been torn apart, how many businesses had been destroyed, how many people had lost faith in love because of one woman's greed. What will happen to her now? She's looking at 25 to 40 years in federal prison. With her record and the number of victims, she won't be eligible for parole for at least 20 years. Detective Park closed the folder. Justice moves slowly sometimes, but it does move. After Detective Park left, I sat alone in my office as the sun set outside my window. The building was quiet, most of our employees having gone home to their families, their normal lives unmarked by the kind of betrayal we'd experienced. I thought about Ethan, probably at home getting ready for a date with Lisa, the teacher. I thought about the business, stronger now than it had been before Victoria nearly destroyed it. I thought about the employees who'd stood by us through the worst of it, who'd refused to believe the lies about poor judgment and family dysfunction. Most of all, I thought about survival. Not just the survival of our business or our family relationships, but the survival of the ability to trust, to hope, to believe that most people are fundamentally good, even when we've encountered someone who fundamentally isn't. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Lisa wants to cook dinner for us Sunday. Her pasta primavera, she promises, is better than yours. I told her that's impossible, but she's determined to prove me wrong. I laughed out loud in the empty office. The idea of someone trying to outcook me for my son's affection would have terrified me 6 months ago. Now it just sounded like fun. I texted back, challenge accepted. Should I bring my famous focaccia as backup? Definitely. And Grace, thank you for everything. I gathered my things and headed for the door, turning off the lights, and locking up the office that had become the symbol of everything we'd almost lost and everything we'd fought to keep. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean. I stood by my car for a moment, looking back at the building where I'd spent most of my professional life, where I'd been humiliated and vindicated, where I'd watched my son nearly lose everything and then find his way back to himself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build something worthwhile. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten how to feel: peace. Complete, uncomplicated peace. I drove home through the familiar streets, already planning what I'd wear to meet Lisa, the teacher, already imagining the conversation we'd have about my son and what kind of future they might build together. This time, I thought with a smile, I'd start from a place of trust instead of suspicion. This time, I'd remember that not every woman who loved my son was a threat to our family. Some of them, if we were very lucky, might actually be exactly what we needed to make our family complete. The road ahead was clear and bright with possibility.